welcome to Real Life and Archetypes. My name is Marina. So today I want to talk about the upcoming trial of the Karen Reed case. And this is because last year in trial number 1, and I was just new to the case. I started watching, a few days into the trial. It seemed to me that there was like a strategy on the part of the Commonwealth, the prosecutor, to really exhaust the jury. And I spoke about that at that time. I made a few videos about it because to me, that was a deliberate strategy. And the thing is that the trial was taking such a long time, and the prosecutor was going on and on with a droning voice and just exhausting everybody, just saying the same words all the time. What if anything? What if anything? We were all so tired of it. And it seemed to me that overall, the whole case had a lot of weird components. What I'm very surprised by is that now, just before starting trial number 2, the defense apparently is going to pretty much pursue the same kind of strategy. And I just wanted to talk about that and how a little bit surprised I am by that. Because to me, what we found out from a juror who made a few public interviews, he described how, from the perspective of the jurors, it was very different from our own perspective. And that was something that I was pointed out at back then, just because I think in terms of archetypes and the nature of the mind. And one of the things that I think a lot of people do not pay attention to is that when it comes to other people, they're going to have a very different perspective than what we may have. And this is a lack of seeing, what others might be seeing. So we discovered that the ARCA witnesses, which were in fact exculpatory witnesses of the defendant, didn't make at all an impression on the jury. Now, the reason was that the ARCA engineers were hired by the FBI in another investigation. And of course, the jury was not allowed to know who had hired these guys. And despite attempts from the defense to make clear that they were not paid by or, hired by the defense or the prosecutor, the jury simply thought that maybe they were hired by an insurance company, whatever. And a lot of people at that time, they thought, well, it's going to be very clear that they're going to understand that it's a federal investigation. And I thought, I don't think they're going to go into that kind of conclusion. This is a lot of assumption on the part of people to think that the jury is just going to connect the dots. Now, as a public, we're watching. Me personally, I really like to pause and rewind because I need to really pay attention. I'm a much slower kind of mind. And when you're sitting there, I can only imagine, I've never been a juror, but from what was described back then, it was very hot. You have to sit there for many hours and pay attention to a lot of things. And the prosecution was going on and on and on in a way that you totally dropped out. That is a very important keyword for this kind of archetype. When you're not interested, okay, your mind is not onto something, it drops out. And in terms of the archetypes, just as an aside, the mind as an archetype that we all have, if you have a lot of that archetype, you're going to have to pay really attention to how you stimulate your mind. And this is something that we all need to pay attention to. If you really notice how the nature of the mind is very unstable. It just goes everywhere. It's open and curious, wants to know a lot of things, and it's very difficult to control. So if from your point of view, it's very difficult to control your mind, it means that from the point of view of somebody external, it's going to be very easy to distract your mind and to control it as well. And for me, because of my own experiences, it's not that I knew what was happening. I didn't know, but I don't make assumptions that people are going to perceive things. Now, we're talking about a case that, in my opinion, should not have even gone to trial. And during that trial, to me, it became apparent that there was some very shady business. And it seemed to me, from my perspective, that because of that, and the fact that they had pursued this trial when they should have let it go, there was something going on. They need to get rid of the defendant in some form or another. And I think that, to me, what that means, and I said it at the time, at the end of the trial and before the end of the trial, when the mistrial was declared, everybody was saying, well, they're not going to try that again, that case again. Surely they're not. Well, I said back then, they will stop at nothing. Because to me, because of my own experiences, what I was detecting was an environment that is deeply corrupt and that has a lot to lose if Karen Read actually is declared innocent. And so, to me, the strategy of the third-party culprit has a few issues from the perspective of looking at the mind and how you have to understand that these are people that are going to be sitting there. And the third-party culprit is sort of putting a burden on the jury to become detectives. And I think that to expect that from the jury is a mistake. The jury is not going to accept that. They have to do that kind of work. And from my point of view, that's what the defense is asking of the jury by presenting a third-party culprit and trying to, point at all of the little clues that lead to the three people that they have named as third-party culprit. I think that's a mistake because you're asking the jury to make even more effort from their mind, from the point of view of their mind. And remember what happened in the first trial. This should have never even gone to trial. And it turns out that there were a lot of shenanigans during the jury deliberations because of a lot of the details. For those who follow the case, they understand what I mean. I mean, it was very shady. And when this was all happening, when we were watching the trial and everybody was like, oh, she's going to be acquitted because, well, yeah, she should have been acquitted. And first of all, she shouldn't even have been taken to trial. So my question was, why is there a trial? There's something fishy here. And then I see the prosecutor going on and on for 2 months, and all of those interruptions with that judge who just works like 5 minutes a day, 3 days a week. This was just extending and overextending. The first thing that came to my mind was the jury's state of mind and how it would impact their mind. That's just because that's the way that I think, and also because of my own experience and how I know that there are people who understand mind techniques and manipulation and exhaustion of the mind. It's so easy to distract people. And now you would think, well, if the prosecution does that, surely by default, it should benefit the defendant because that plays to reasonable doubt. Well, you would think, except that in this case, things were not normal. This is not a normal environment. I've seen other trials and prosecutors are normal. This one is a very bizarre case where for the second trial, the Commonwealth, the prosecutor doesn't even want the medical examiner's, conclusion that the cause of death is undetermined to come into the trial. I mean, the whole thing is very shady. They want to get rid of this woman. That's my opinion. That has been my impression from the beginning. Why do I believe that? Because suddenly you start to find out that in that environment, there's a lot of shenanigans going on, and particularly a lot of suicides of people. Now, connected to the FBI investigation that led to exculpatory evidence from engineers for Karen Read And in spite of that, she's still not, acquitted. From that same investigation, the feds have discovered that what was ruled as a suicide 2 years ago of a young woman actually was a murder. And the murderer was a police officer, because it's a super corrupt environment. And they were grooming girls and passing them around. And she was one of them. And she became pregnant, and they had to get rid of her. And also, I think during the trial, we heard that, maybe, I can't remember for sure, or maybe I saw that information in other places. But John O'Keefe, who is the victim of the Karen Reed case trial, his best friend also died by suicide. And then there was another guy that also died by suicide. I'm thinking there's a lot of people committing suicide. Why did it catch my attention? Well, maybe it caught your attention as well, because during the trial, we read the texts of the lead investigator, now disgraced Trooper Michael Proctor, who wrote on the day that the event happened and John O'Keefe died, and he bizarrely was given the lead of the case when he was supposed to be off. He was given the lead, and he started the investigation. And we read from his text on his phone, he says to people, "I hope Karen Reed kills herself," he said. Now, who the hell would say that? That is bizarre. That caught my attention, not only because it's disgusting, and that was, pretty much what the defense was hammering in front of the jury to show just how gross that guy was, and also because of a lot of other details. But to me, that sounded the alarm, because I was thinking there's a lot of people committing suicide in that environment. Why would this guy say something like this? To me, it felt like code word. High speculation, I don't know. But why would you say that? Why on earth would you write something like that about somebody just in the first hours of an investigation? So the thing, going back to the mind, you're asking from the perspective of the defense, you're asking the jury, who already in the first trial behaved in a way that was unexpected. Also, the shenanigans. It turns out, we found out that the jury had actually acquitted her, the defendant, on 2 of the 3 charges. But the judge did not, the whole thing was like manipulated, and it was not part of the verdict or the mistrial. The judge suddenly, was in a hurry to leave, and everything happened like that. And days later, we found out that actually the jury wanted to speak to the judge, some of the jurors, and the foreman became, the cockblock there, and he didn't allow communications with the judge to transmit that they wanted to ask if they could actually acquit on 2 of the 3 charges. They were prevented from accessing the judge to make that question by the foreman, who was chosen by the judges. Lots of weird stuff going on here. So my point here is that with the third-party culprit, what you're doing is putting a lot of burden on the minds of the jurors, who are going to be exhausted with endless, distractions that the Commonwealth is going to put onto them, especially after the first trial, because they are actually way much more advanced than we would expect for a case like this that shouldn't even be tried. This is what people don't see from my point of view. People are just thinking, but she's going to be acquitted because that's how it should be. This is all ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And look how far the Commonwealth has come. Look how far they are. That, there's a lot of stuff going on. So they're going to be 2 months again. Now the defense, instead of, taking 2 days for their case, they're going to take about 2 weeks. Thank God, because the last time it was like, they thought that because of the ARCA testimony, that was it, because that's logically how it should be. But this place is very corrupt. There's a lot of shenanigans. So why would you expect the same result doing the same thing? You're asking the jurors to be detectives. You're putting a burden on them when they're going to be tired and they're not going to understand a lot of things, and the prosecution is going to bombard them with a lot of nonsense. You can't ask them to remember details, because during the trial, the issue is that lawyers are not allowed to editorialize for the jury. So that's because of this issue that you can't do that, in my opinion, because the lawyers cannot just stand there and tell the story. They have to establish foundation while interrogating witnesses. So it's not like a direct line to say and tell the jurors, see, this is what happened. This is weird. And this is part of our third party culprit theory. You can't even tell the jury that. They have to make all of those conclusions by themselves on their own. Why would you expect them to do that? That's already a lot of work that they have. So for me, I wouldn't do that. I would mention the botched investigation, hammer on that, and then propose that because it's botched, that there can be somebody else who is culpable, but to not put any names out there, and then hammer on the result of that, which is that the burden of proof is on the Commonwealth, that they don't meet it, and there's the reasonable doubt. And I would hammer on that. So this is from my perspective as a potential juror. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, but just thinking in terms of to simplify things, because otherwise we're going to have shenanigans again. Because what we heard from the juror who gave public interviews was very surprising, and there were shenanigans, but also some people who he actually said that everything that the defense in the first trial was proposing that was regarding, their theory of a third party culprit, they interpreted as distractors. That was the word that he used. It was all distractors. Again, distraction. When it was, just trying to lead the jury to understand that it was evidence that something was off and was bizarre. So I wouldn't put that on the jurors. I wouldn't do that. I don't know why they're doing the same thing and expect a different result. But that's just my perspective. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about that. I love trials. I always tell you, I love trials. It's a great way to pay attention to how the mind works. And again, if you're going to be dealing with a jury that's going to be there for 2 months, make things very simple. Don't ask them to be detectives, to play Sherlock Holmes, and to guess what it is that you have on your mind when you can't tell them. You can't say, hey, this is what I'm talking about. You can't do that as a lawyer. They have to infer that from, your interviews, your interrogation of witnesses. So I wouldn't do that just because of that reason. And I would go and simplify reasonable doubt, reasonable doubt, reasonable doubt again and again, because there's too many shenanigans there. And the same is going to happen here again. I'm hoping that, something happens, but there's a lot at stake for a lot of people here, for a lot of corrupt people, I mean. And they want to get rid of Karen Read. Remember what Michael Proctor said. Why does he say that? Because when this is over, what they want is for her to go to prison, and then people will forget about her, because eventually this will be out of the news. But if she wins, it's a disaster, because she's going to sue the hell out of the city, and rightly so, in my opinion. So, and then there's a lot more stuff that's going to happen. It's not going to go away from the news, and they don't want that for many reasons. So I am actually not as comfortable with the second trial. I don't think it's a done deal at all, because I look at what happened in the past and all of the stuff that is happening. We're seeing that now during the hearings, pre-trials, all of the weird stuff that is happening as well. So anyway, for those of you who follow, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.